Hello and welcome to Woman Up, the podcast series from Desperate Art Wives. And I'm Susan Merrick. Today we're talking to Birmingham-based artist Sue Richardson, whose involvement with her work, such as the Postal Art event, was pioneering from other artists. Hello, Sue.
Hello, Susan.
Amy from Desperate Art Wives caught up with you briefly last year with your exhibition Home Strike, which,
Yes.
if I'm right in thinking, has been 40 years since you did use some of the pieces in the original exhibition at the ICA. Is that correct?
Yes, it would be. Yes. At least 40
amazing.
years. Yes.
So I guess my first question for you then, Sue, is from your perspective, how do you think things have changed for women artists and other artists in that time?
Right. Well, probably not as much as they should have. I think that there's certainly more interest in looking to see what women artists are doing, mainly because of younger women researchers and art historians and curators who are now looking back into what was happening at that time and promoting it again. Because I've not really been involved in the art world, probably for the last 35 years. And even when I was, because it was feminist art and because I was working with women, we were kind of outside of it. So really, I see that every now and again there's a big point made about women being involved in something, or, at last a woman has won something, or it just still seems, really, really difficult. So I don't think all that much has changed. It probably is slightly easier to get work in the art field than it was. And that's probably more to do with the fact that people have been shamed into it.
I think that's a really good point. For me, in the art school that I was at, it was that word of shame again, but the other way around, it was kind of like, you really want to put yourself in that bracket because you're going to be limiting what you can do, I believe I was told. And this was only 3 years ago.
Yes.
So, but actually, if so many of us are still feeling as you did in the 70s that we need different ways of working in order to get our work out there, to look at different ways of working and look at different experiences of women, then it is necessary. And then, we do need to be doing it because it's still relevant.
Yeah, I think it is. And I think it's still not acceptable to work in ways that can be defined as craft. Even though, painting's craft and so sculpture, I've never understood it. It's just really a con.
But if you're right, if it falls under the term of craft, there's nose turning still. And,
oh yes,
it's a really interesting perspective on materials.
Absolutely. It's really, I find it depressing and quite upsetting, to find how little things have changed. Just at the moment, I've got 2 pieces of work in Birmingham Museum and Art Gallery in an exhibition called Women Power Protest, which has only come about because it's 100 years since some women got the vote. And I just keep thinking, is it going to be another 100 years before they drag out all of this work, all women's work, mostly from the Arts Council collection, including some wonderful work that's just never, ever seen.
Yeah. It is. I try not to be depressed about it, but I suppose that when you see it like that, it can make you feel like not working, but it can also, for myself anyway, fuel that idea of, right, okay, we need to get out there, we need to be doing stuff. So I am excited as well about the potential there is, and that it's incredibly slow changing, but that I think changes are happening. And it is honestly thanks to artists like yourself, Sue, who, you know, stuck their necks out and said, you know, this isn't what we're trying to do here isn't working. So let's look at doing it in a different way. And I think that's what artists do well, is that they look at doing things in a different way.
I think so. I mean, you know, we did have very limited funding in order to enable us to do things like the Postal event and Phoenix, which was, you know, a travelling installation that 4 of us did after the Postal event. So we did have a small amount of funding, and it was community-based funding. And it was because, you know, our main interest was in linking and connecting with ordinary women, really. You know, and we had to just think we don't care if the art world doesn't want to see it or doesn't recognise it. And that was definitely the basis that we worked on. And although we did show in galleries, we showed in libraries and in community centres as well. In fact, the only galleries we ever got to show in were ones where there was a sympathetic man at the helm, you know, because it was always a man. No, there were never any women. Yeah. So, you know, yes, that definitely was what we were trying to do. We were just trying to make sure that we could make work that would connect with as many women as possible.
Excellent. Now, you said that you were then kind of out of the art world for the last 35 years, did you say? Although I've seen you've been back within it the last couple of years.
Well, in the last couple of years, mainly because my colleague Monica Ross, who I worked with back in the 70s and who was probably the main reason I got involved in feminist art, along with Kate Walker, she, I think it was probably in about 2010, she got in touch with me. We hadn't really been in touch for years, and said, you know, you've got to do something with that body of work that you created in the 70s and 80s, you know, because it shouldn't just be hidden away in a trunk. And she did her best to help me to connect with Alexandra Kokoli, who put on a sort of retrospective show for me at Goldsmiths, also with the help of Althea Greenan at Goldsmiths at the Sly Library there. That was how I came back into it, you know, because it was because Monica got in touch with me. I'd given up on it years before. You know, I've always thought that I did some really good pieces of work that stood out, and I look at the same pieces of work now and I think they still stand. You know, they're still relevant. And I think I'd had to bury it because otherwise it would have just been too depressing. You know, I had to bury how I felt about it. I also, you know, the fact that I couldn't get any work because of the kind of artwork that I did. You know, it prevented me from teaching in colleges. You know, I just wasn't able to get anything. So I had to move out of that field. You know, I'd got to make some money. And I mean, it wasn't really, I mean, I did various things. I did teaching and so on in schools, but I ended up moving into the music field because I felt that I wanted to, I got an opportunity really to do that. And I didn't want to be a front person. You know, I'd had enough of being a front person in an organisation, you know, where all you get is abuse hurled at you and your work destroyed, you know.
Yeah, that must have been very difficult. I watched a short interview that you did with Studio International, which was, I think, last year. And you mentioned, you talk about your work with the band there, and you said that in a way you felt like you were, I don't know if you used the word pioneering, I think that's my word, but you were doing something that women weren't doing there as well, in that you, am I right in saying that you created an instrument from a washboard?
Yeah, well, yeah, kind of. I mean, it wasn't my idea. I have to say it was the two guys that I worked with, two men that I worked with, were songwriters, and I happened to know one of them, and I was around when they were writing songs, and one of them wanted some percussion in the background with their songs, but they didn't want drums. And he used to mess around with a pen on the back of a plastic plate, you know, where the raised letters are. And he used to make little sounds. I mean, he's, you know, very good arranger, and he could make sounds on the back of that would give a kind of hi-hat sound, you know, kind of a nice steady rhythm. And he said, you know, a washboard would do, you know. So you could do that, just find a washboard and do us a bit of, background. So, I mean, it wasn't exactly a cool thing to do in the 80s, as you can imagine. It was the days of glam rock. So, but, I didn't mind doing that because I thought their songs were great. In fact, the theme of their songs was quite similar to the theme of my artwork in that it was a bit political, a bit serious, with quite serious messages, but done in a way that made people laugh. The band's called Terry and Jerry, and you won't have heard of it unless you were around in the 80s, but we're back doing it again, which is really great. We've been doing it again for 4 years, mainly because we're all still alive, I think.
Can we find links to that online?
Well, yeah, just go on the Terry and Jerry website.
Excellent.
I was going to say that saved me really because it enabled me to do something creative where I just needed a rest from being in the forefront of something. It was just too unpleasant and difficult. And also I could, earn enough money to live doing that. So I did that for 4 years.
That sounds like a really inspiring but protective, I can't think of the right term, way of transitioning.
I think so. I mean, it was quite cathartic. I got a lot of stick because I was working with men, and at the time you weren't really, you weren't supposed to do that. But for me, it meant that I could go into the background, I changed my name. I wore shades and I just really enjoyed, I'd always been in love percussion and, it was a chance for me to do that, even if it was on a washboard, but it ended up being a really good thing because I had to be creative with it.
Amazing. You said you changed your name. You mean while you were in the band, you had a different name?
Yeah. Yes, I
Was
had
that because you really felt the need to hide away?
Yeah, I did. Yes.
Okay.
And also, I needed to hide away from other feminists too for a while. Things have changed, but in the 70s, you really weren't allowed to do that.
Well, I think some people still potentially feel that, and I think it can still be. It can be difficult to have open conversations without being frightened of repercussion.
Well, absolutely.
Especially in the world of online media and constant audience. Yeah.
Yes, it's very difficult. And I mean, Anyway, it was really good that they gave me the opportunity to do that. And I had the sense really to take it up instead of thinking, crikey, why am I how can I do this? I've got a 10-year-old son and, how can I go off around the country playing a washboard? Because I said it wasn't even a cool thing to do, it was very embarrassing.
It sounds very cool now.
But, I made it work to my advantage, and because everybody was behind it, and because I lived in Birmingham, I decided the washboard that I had wore out, and after various attempts to get other ones, to find ones with little, with appeals on the television and stuff, I decided, as Birmingham was the centre of the metal industry at the time still, that I would get one made in Birmingham. So I've got a big washboard that doesn't look at all like a washboard. So people imagine it's something else, and that helped quite a lot. Anyway, I should stop talking about that. But that was what I did next, that was what I did next. Yeah. And then when the bands broke up so that people could do different things, I'd learned enough through helping to do the administration and the tour bookings and stuff, to go into arts administration. And that was what I did for the rest of my time. So that was my link to the art world, was through arts administration, and helping other people. Yeah. So
last year you were part of the Home Strike exhibition.
Yes.
With Paula Chamber and 2 other artists. Could you tell me a bit more about your involvement in that?
Right. Well, I think that probably came about through a link with Alexandra Kokoli again, with Joanna at L'Étranger. And Joanna was very interested in my work and thought that it would link with the other work. And also, it was really good because there were lots of events organised around it. So there was plenty of opportunity for discussion and things like the interview with, that you've just referred to.
Yeah, the Studio International.
Yes. So, and it was a really good opportunity for me to show that particular part of my work. And also to put in some things that I'd done last year, which were based on the same ideas, but kind of updated a little bit.
Yeah, I noticed in the interview that you mentioned that there were some new pieces, and that was really exciting to see.
Yeah, there were. I mean, I'm not sure that was Joanna really encouraged me to keep going. You know, she came and saw my work, and you know, she said, why don't you do work now?" And I kind of said, "Well, because I used all my good ideas. I did it all in the 10 years that I was working, and I don't really have that much more to say. You know, I feel that I've covered it, and things haven't changed." And she just said, "Well, you know, that's absolutely right, but there's no reason why. You know, I mean, each individual piece of work I did was different." And about something different.
Yeah.
And she was encouraging me to just, you know, maybe expand on some of those same themes in relation to what's happening today. So I think the most successful piece that I did was probably the expressing breasts piece, with 3 breasts displayed on the wall, like wall plaques, and extra breasts sort of near the skirting board. And they were about how breasts are seen, how women see their breasts, how men see their breasts, and so on. So that was my kind of, my bit of Me Too connection. But, you know, it's the same idea.
Yeah,
things haven't changed enough.
Because it's still relevant.
Oh, yeah.
I love the breast down by the skirting board,
Yes.
with, as you said, the men's hands cupping, with the milk coming out, and you talk about the idea of women's expression still being, down by the floor, hidden slightly, out of sight. I think that's still a very powerful reflection of women now, or at least many women now.
Yeah, it's still not okay for some reason to show any representation of women's breasts that's to do with their actual function. You know, it's still not okay. Yeah. I mean, even they're in the Museum and Art Gallery exhibition now, and they've had to put a sign up saying that there's sensitive content. I find it unbelievable. I cannot. How
if
can
you had
do
just
that?
the nude, if you have just a nude bust, there'd be no sign.
Well, no, I mean, anyway, it's not just that. Obviously, there's things about rape as well, but equally, stuff that definitely needs to be seen shouldn't be hidden from children. Yeah. People need to see it. Yeah. So it's quite shocking that those things are still not okay. It's not okay to discuss them, to see them, to work, and do work around them and about them. Mm.
Well, as it sounds like Joanna from L'Étranger Gallery has been encouraging you, I think I would love to see more of your work. And in relation to, as you said in the interview that I watched, that you're now a grandmother as well.
Oh, yeah.
So I think, I'm sure it wouldn't only be myself. There'd be a lot of people who'd be really interested to hear your thoughts or see your expression on how you feel things are in current society with the eyes of a grandmother as well as a mother.
Well, yeah, the work that I'm doing now, and I have been doing work since Joanna encouraged me. You can't choose what you make your work about. You just get ideas and you have to follow them up. And so what I've found is that actually most of it is about the past at the moment. I mean, maybe that will change. But I've been looking at what's been happening to women 100 years ago and 200 years ago, partly because not enough has changed, that same reason. So looking at, Birmingham chain makers, women chain makers who were paid less than the men.
Right.
And who went on strike, to change that kind of thing. Glove makers, all sorts of stories around them. All of the things that women have done in the past, where, they haven't had the kind of recognition, financially or in any other way, that they should have had.
How are you managing to research that? Because from my own experience, it can often be quite difficult to find information about women's roles in the past because it wasn't always archived. It's not always written about as much as men's history.
Well, I mean, it's probably not the best way, but what I've been doing is cutting corners. I've been doing my research by reading novels about those times, which is just something that I do anyway. I'm a great reader. And I just happen to have read lots of books in the last year or two where there have been the stories of, women's stories from the past. And so in a way, I'm doing that, this work on the backs of the women who've written the books who've done the research.
So
cutting corners in a way, but yeah, the research is already there. And because
that's a great way to research, I think.
Yeah, I've got a good collection of things that I want to use. Things from the past. I've always collected gloves, which is why, lots of my work has gloves in it. And because they're such a strong representation of hands, So I've got lots of things collected. I've also got things that belong to my mother, who was one of the first women who went to college, and who then, when she came out of college as a qualified teacher, couldn't teach, because they weren't allowed to, because the men coming back from the war had to have the jobs. So, all that kind of thing is partly in my family and partly so it's kind of stuff that I know already or that's coming through other people's research. But at the moment, those are the things that seem to have spurred me on to doing some work. And I've got quite a reasonable collection of half-finished pieces of work now about that. And also because my uncle was in the First World War, and he actually came back. But he sent things back from the front when he was there, handkerchiefs and so on. So I've got a collection of things from then. So it all links very much with what's happening at the moment, I think, because of the centenary. Yeah. So maybe it's to do with that. I think because it's so much in the news and so much in people's thoughts at the moment. Things about war, things about women's involvement in that, and things about industry and teaching.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's not what Joanna wanted me to do. I think she would like me to be working on, how I feel about what's happening now. But somehow, at the moment, it's not my concern. But I'm sure it will be.
I think it sounds like you've got some really exciting stuff being made. And you're right. I think it's you can't force what comes. You have to.
You can't.
You have to work with the ideas that are making you passionate about it, making you feel about it.
And I'm kind of in my 70s now, and I do feel that it's a time of reflection. It is a time of reflection and looking back. I don't have so much involvement in the current world. I mean, my 18-year-old and 14-year-old granddaughters do. And, I talk to them about things, but it's their world, it's not mine really. It's a strange, the world goes ahead of you as you get older. And so some of the concerns that I certainly would have had if I was young now, I just feel, I need to leave those to younger women. It's going to be their job to follow those things up and do something about those things. But I'm very worried and concerned, I think, about things being lost from the past and about wheels being reinvented all the time, And I think that's why I want to make some work about women in the past, who've been forgotten.
I think that's a really important point to end on, actually, Sue. Thank you. That it's so important for artists now and for women in society now to be aware of what has gone before, what has happened, what has changed, what roles women have had in that, and use that in terms of pushing forward for more change. And that's been brilliant to talk to you, Sue. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity. It's been good to talk about it.
No problem.
Thank you for listening. This was Woman Up, a podcast series by Desperate Art Wives.